Quake was one of the first 3D shooting games for PC, released in 1996. It puts the player in a science fiction setting, where they must battle otherworldly enemies. Players use guns, rockets, and other weapons to traverse the game's 3D rendered environment. Duke Nukem 3D, released in 1996, put players into the shoes of the title character to battle aliens in a fast-paced shooter. Players must use all manner of weapons and explosives to defeat the aliens. The game's visuals, sound, and more created an immersive shooting experience. Wolfenstein 3D, released in 1992, is credited as the first 3D shooter game for PC. Players take control of a character as he battles Nazis using guns, knives, and more. Wolfenstein's simplistic graphics and sound help to make it a classic. Doom, released in 1993, is another classic PC shooter. Players are placed in a science fiction world where they must battle hordes of aliens and demonic forces. With guns, grenades, and more, they must make their way through a number of levels. Heretic, released in 1995, is a shooter game from the same people who created Doom, but it has a much more medieval setting. The player is placed in a fantasy world and must battle monsters and demons using both ranged and melee weapons. Descent, released in 1995, puts the player in a 3D environment with a range of weapons and vehicles. The game requires players to navigate levels filled with enemies, while piloting a robotic aircraft. Earlier versions of the game included support for multiplayer. Half-Life, released in 1998, is an iconic first-person shooter created by Valve. The game has an intense storyline as the player must battle their way through an immersive science fiction world. With weapons and alien technology, the player must complete their mission. Counter-Strike, released in 1999, is another game from Valve that has an immense following. Players team up as either terrorists or counter-terrorists and battle it out in an array of different maps. The game puts an emphasis on team play and strategy. Redneck Rampage, released in 1996, is a comedic shooter game set in the fictional town of Hickston. Players must battle aliens, mutants, and hillbilly stereotypes using a range of weapons, from pistols to dynamite. It's got a cartoonish art style that helps to enhance its light tone. Released in 1997, is set in the early 20th century and includes a large range of weapons. Players battle their way through a horror-themed environment and battle arcane monsters. The game includes support for multiplayer, as well as hidden secrets that must be discovered. Star Wars: Dark Forces, released in 1995, takes place after the events of the first Star Wars movie. Players are placed in the shoes of an Imperial stormtrooper, tasked with fighting both rebels and evil alien forces. A range of weapons, including lightsabers, Alien vs Predator, released in 1999, is based on the long-running Alien and Predator franchises. Players can choose to play as either an alien, a human, or a predator in this thrilling shooter game. A range of different weapons, as well as stealth tactics, are available to help complete the mission. Released in 1996, puts players in the shoes of Lara Croft in this iconic 3D shooter. The game not only has an array of weapons, but also includes puzzles, exploration, and jumping sections to add variety to the experience. Overblood, released in 1997, is a sci-fi shooter game that puts players in a medical-themed setting. With guns, drugs, and other weapons, they must battle both alien and human enemies while trying to uncover the truth behind the experiment. System Shock, released in 1994, takes place on a space station. Uncovering the truth behind the experiment is key, as the player battles both aliens and cyborgs. The game has a range of weapons as well as areas to explore and puzzles to complete. Star Fox Adventures, released in 2002, is based on the popular console game series. Players must journey across a 3D world, battling aliens and robots with lasers and other weapons. Platforming and exploration elements are also included in the game. MechWarrior 2, released in 1995, is a shooter game set in the future. Rather than use guns or swords, players take control of massive mechanical robots and fight versus enemy forces. The game has an array of weapons and vehicles, as well as mission objectives. Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos, released in 2002, is a real-time strategy shooter game set in a fantasy world. Players take control of an army as they battle enemy forces. In each level, they must deploy units, build structures, and manage resources in order to succeed. Interstate 76, released in 1997, is a vehicular shooter game set in the 1970s. Players take the role of Groove Champion, a vigilante on a mission to avenge the death of his mentor. The game has a range of cars, tanks, and other vehicles to use in missions. Red Faction, released in 2001, puts players on Mars and tasks them with overthrowing an oppressive government. Both first-person shooting and vehicle shooting are included in the game, and the game's Geomod engine allows the player to create their own ways to complete objectives. The Suffering, released in 2004, is a horror-themed shooter game set on an island prison. Players must battle hordes of monsters, as well as the demons in their own mind, in order to uncover the truth and save the island's inhabitants from their fate. Mirror's Edge, released in 2008, is a parkour-style shooter game set in a futuristic world. Players must make their way through a number of levels, using a range of weapons and free-running skills in order to complete their mission. Stronghold Crusader, released in 2002, is a shooter strategy game set in the Middle Ages. Players must not only use a range of weapons to battle enemy forces, but must also build and manage a fortress in order to succeed. Necrovision, released in 2009, is a shooter game that takes place during WWI. Players battle undead soldiers, monsters, and other supernatural beings in a mixture of shooter and stealth sections. The game is filled with horror elements, providing an intense atmosphere. Alien Shooter, released in 2003, is a top-down shooter game where players must battle their way through hordes of aliens. With a range of weapons and upgrades, the player must clear each area of the aliens in order to progress through the game.